You don't notice it at first, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. Because laziness doesn't arrive like a storm crashing through your life. It seeps in like a slow leak, quiet, invisible, patient. And you sit there thinking you still have time. You tell yourself it's just one day, just one break, just one moment to breathe. But what you're really doing is making a trade you don't even realize you've agreed to. You're exchanging your future for comfort in the present. And the worst part is, it feels harmless. It feels justified. It feels like you deserve it. And that's the lie that keeps you stuck. Because laziness never introduces itself as destruction. It disguises itself as rest, as self-care, as, I'll do it later. And you buy it every single time. You accept the deal without reading the cost, without understanding the consequences, without realizing that every second you delay, every action you avoid, every responsibility you push away is being recorded somewhere deep inside your life, like a silent debt that keeps growing whether you acknowledge it or not. And here's where it gets brutal, because you're not just losing time, you're losing momentum, you're losing sharpness, you're losing the version of yourself that could have existed if you had just acted when you said you would. You think it's just one missed workout, just one postponed plan, just one excuse. But that's never how it works, because 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 10, and before you even notice it, you're no longer someone who delays occasionally. You are the person who always delays. It becomes your identity, your default setting, your comfort zone. And now, you're not just dealing with laziness as an action, you're living it as a lifestyle. And that's when it starts costing you in ways you can't ignore anymore. Because the opportunities you once had begin to disappear. The energy you once felt starts fading. The confidence you used to carry quietly erodes. And you can't even pinpoint when it started slipping away. You just wake up one day feeling heavier, slower, more uncertain. And you wonder why. You look around your life and nothing is completely broken. Nothing has collapsed dramatically. But everything feels less. Less progress. Less clarity. Less control. And deep down, you know exactly why. You just don't want to admit it, because admitting it means taking responsibility. It means facing the fact that you chose this, not in one big decision, but in hundreds of small ones. Every time you said later, every time you chose ease over effort, every time you ignored that voice inside you that told you to move, to act, to push forward, you silenced it, and now that voice is weaker, quieter, almost gone. And that should scare you. Because that voice was the part of you that wanted more, the part of you that refused to settle, the part of you that knew you were capable of something greater, and you traded it for temporary comfort, for moments that didn't last, for distractions that didn't build anything. And now you're left with the cost, not in some dramatic, obvious way, but in subtle, painful realizations, like noticing how much time has passed without real progress, like feeling behind while everyone else seems to be moving forward. Like knowing you could do more, but not having the discipline to prove it. And it eats at you slowly, not enough to force immediate change, but enough to create a constant tension inside your mind. A quiet dissatisfaction that never fully goes away. And that's the real price of laziness. It's not just what you lose externally, it's what it does to you internally. It changes how you see yourself. It lowers your standards. It convinces you that average is acceptable, that effort is optional, that potential is something you can always come back to later. But later never comes. It just becomes another excuse, another delay, another day added to the debt you're building. And while you're sitting there thinking you're resting, thinking you're taking a break, thinking you're in control, time is moving, life is progressing, and the gap between who you are and who you could have been is getting wider, deeper, harder to close. And one day, if you keep going like this, you won't just feel behind, you'll feel stuck, completely stuck. Because laziness doesn't just slow you down, it traps you. It builds invisible walls around your habits, your mindset, your identity, until breaking out feels impossible, until effort feels unnatural, until discipline feels like punishment instead of power. And by then, the cost isn't just time, it's who you've become. It's the version of yourself that settles, that hesitates, that avoids. And you have to understand this clearly. There is no neutral ground here. You are either building momentum or losing it. You are either becoming sharper or duller, stronger or weaker, more disciplined or more dependent on comfort. There is no standing still, And every moment you choose laziness, you are actively moving backward, even if it doesn't feel like it, even if it looks like nothing is happening. Something is always happening beneath the surface. Habits are forming, patterns are strengthening, identities are being built. And right now, whether you like it or not, you are building the identity of someone who hesitates, someone who delays, someone who chooses the easy path. And that identity will dictate your future far more than your intentions ever will. Because intentions don't create results, actions do. And if your actions are weak, inconsistent, driven by comfort instead of commitment, then your results will reflect that, no matter how much you want something different, no matter how many times you promise yourself you'll change, because change doesn't come from what you say, it comes from what you repeatedly do. And right now, what you're repeatedly doing is choosing the easier option, the softer path, the immediate relief over long-term growth. And that's costing you more than you're willing to admit. It's costing you your edge, your confidence, your future. And the most dangerous part is that you've normalized it. You've made it feel okay. You've convinced yourself that it's not that serious, that you still have time, that you'll fix it later. But later is built on what you do now. And if now is filled with excuses, then later will be filled with regret, whether you accept it or not, whether you're ready to face it or not. The cost is already accumulating. And the question isn't whether you're paying it. The question is how much more you're willing to lose before you finally decide it's enough. It's a normal morning, nothing dramatic, nothing extreme, just the kind of morning you've lived 100 times before. Your alarm goes off, and for a split second there's a choice, a very small one, almost invisible. You feel that moment where you could get up immediately or stay in bed just a little longer. And you tell yourself it doesn't matter. You tell yourself 5 more minutes won't change anything. But it does, because that decision sets the tone for everything that follows. You hit snooze, then again and again. And by the time you finally get up, you're already behind. Not just in time, but in mindset. You're rushed, slightly irritated, a little foggy, and you carry that into the rest of your day. You skip something you plan to do. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe it's reading. Maybe it's that one task you said would move your life forward. And you replace it with something easier, something automatic, scrolling, checking, distracting. And again you tell yourself it's harmless, just this once. But it's never just once. It's a pattern. And that pattern follows you into your work, into your responsibilities, into every decision you make. You delay starting. You wait for the right mood. You hesitate when things get uncomfortable. And slowly, your output becomes average, then below average. Not because you're incapable, but because you're inconsistent, because you're negotiating with yourself instead of executing. And while you're doing that, time is moving, opportunities are moving, people around you are moving. The colleague who started at the same point as you begins to get ahead, not because they're smarter, but because they start when they're supposed to start. They finish what they said they would finish. They don't waste energy debating whether they feel like it. They just do it, and you notice it. Maybe not immediately, but over weeks, over months, you start to feel the gap. You see the results you don't have, the recognition you didn't earn, the progress you didn't make. And it stings, quietly, deeply, because you know the truth. You know you had the same hours, the same chances, the same starting line. But you chose differently in those small, everyday moments. You chose delay. You chose comfort. You chose excuses. And now you're paying for it, not with some dramatic punishment, but with something far more frustrating, stagnation. That feeling of being stuck while everything else moves forward. And it doesn't stop there. It follows you home, into your personal life, into your relationships, into how you carry yourself. Because when you repeatedly avoid effort, you start to lose trust in yourself. You say you'll do things and then you don't. You make plans and then you break them. And over time, your own words lose weight. Your promises feel empty even to you. And that erodes something fundamental, your confidence. Because confidence isn't built by thinking, it's built by evidence, by proving to yourself again and again that you do what you say you'll do. And right now, the evidence you're collecting is the opposite. It's showing you that you hesitate, that you delay, that you give in when it gets uncomfortable. And that creates a quiet insecurity that you carry everywhere, in conversations, in decisions, in opportunities. You second-guess yourself. You hold back. You play smaller than you could, not because you lack ability, but because you've trained yourself not to trust your own execution. And this is where the cost becomes undeniable. Because it's no longer just about lost time, it's about lost identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who doesn't follow through, someone who almost starts, someone who could have been more, but isn't. And that belief shapes your actions even further. It reinforces the cycle. You expect less from yourself, so you do less. You do less, so you achieve less. You achieve less, so you believe even less in yourself. And it keeps looping, day after day. And meanwhile, life keeps presenting opportunities. Chances to step up, to take responsibility, to grow. But when those moments come, you hesitate, you overthink. You tell yourself you're not ready. And someone else steps in, someone who is just as uncertain but more decisive, more willing to act despite discomfort. And they take the position, they take the chance, they take the life you said you wanted. And you're left watching, analyzing, explaining it away, telling yourself stories about why it wasn't the right time, why it wouldn't have worked, why you're better off waiting. But deep down you know that's not true. You know the real reason. And it's hard to face because it points directly back at your choices, at your habits, at your refusal to act when it mattered. And the cost keeps building, not just in missed opportunities, but in accumulated regret. Small at first, almost manageable, but growing heavier with time. Because every day you delay becomes another reminder of what you didn't do. Another piece of evidence against the person you want to believe you are. And this doesn't just affect your career or your goals. It affects how you experience life itself. Because when you're stuck in this pattern, even your free time isn't satisfying. You rest, but you don't feel recharged. You relax, but you don't feel fulfilled. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you know you haven't earned it. You know there are things you're avoiding, responsibilities you're postponing, potential you're neglecting. And that creates a constant background tension, a low-level dissatisfaction that never fully disappears. And you try to escape it with more comfort, more distraction, more delay. But that only deepens the problem. It increases the cost. Because now you're not just losing time and opportunity, you're losing clarity, focus, direction. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to break out. Because habits solidify, patterns harden, and what once felt like a choice starts to feel like who you are. And that's the most dangerous point. When laziness is no longer something you do, but something you believe you are. Because at that point, you stop fighting it, you accept it, you settle into it, and your life adjusts accordingly. Smaller goals, lower standards, reduced expectations, and everything shrinks to match that identity. And yet the potential is still there. The awareness is still there, which makes it even more painful, because you can see the gap, you can feel what's missing. You know there's more you could be doing, more you could become. But you're trapped in the cost of your own inaction, paying for every excuse you've made, every delay you've justified, every moment you chose comfort over growth. And the reality is simple, brutally simple. Nothing you're experiencing is random. It's all a direct result of those small daily decisions. And unless those decisions change, the cost will keep rising, silently, steadily, until one day you're forced to confront it in full, not as a concept, not as a warning, but as your reality. You've been told that laziness is the problem, that you need more motivation, more discipline, more willpower. And you've been trying to fix yourself from that angle for years, blaming your habits, blaming your environment, blaming your lack of energy. But here's the truth that hits different, the one most people never say out loud. Laziness is not your biggest enemy. It's the symptom, the surface, the visible part of something much deeper and much more dangerous. Because what you call laziness is actually a trained response, a conditioned pattern your brain has learned to protect you from discomfort. And once you understand this, everything changes. Because now it's not about you being weak, it's about you being programmed. Every time you avoided something hard in the past, your brain recorded that as relief. Every time you chose comfort, it rewarded you with ease, with dopamine, with a temporary sense of safety. And over time it built a system, an automatic response that says, avoid effort, stay safe, conserve energy. And now when you face something challenging, something uncertain, something that demands growth, your brain doesn't evaluate it logically. It reacts emotionally. It triggers resistance, hesitation, procrastination, and you interpret that feeling as laziness. But it's not laziness, it's conditioning. It's your brain doing exactly what it was trained to do. And that's the twist, because it means the battle you've been fighting is not just about discipline, It's about rewiring. It's about breaking a loop that has been reinforced hundreds, maybe thousands of times. And here's where it gets even more real. Because if laziness is a trained response, then every time you give into it, you're not just failing in that moment, you're strengthening the pattern. You're making it more automatic, more dominant, more difficult to break the next time. You're literally training yourself to avoid effort. And on the other side, every time you act despite resistance, every time you push through discomfort, every time you do the thing you said you would do even when you don't feel like it, you're weakening that pattern. You're creating a new one that associates action with progress, with identity, with control. And this is where the perspective shifts completely. Because now the question is no longer, why am I so lazy? The question becomes, what am I reinforcing? What patterns are you building with your daily choices? Because your life right now is not the result of your intentions, it's the result of your conditioning. And conditioning doesn't care about what you want, it only cares about what you repeat. And that explains something most people struggle to understand. Why you can know exactly what to do and still not do it. Why you can have clear goals, strong desires, even a sense of urgency, and still find yourself stuck in the same patterns. Because knowledge doesn't override conditioning, intention doesn't break habits, repetition does. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep attacking the wrong problem. You'll keep waiting for motivation, for the right mood, for some external push to change your behavior. When in reality, the change only happens when you start interrupting the pattern in real time, when you feel that resistance and you act anyway. Not because you feel ready, but because you understand what's at stake. Because now you see that every moment of hesitation is not neutral. It's training, it's reinforcement, it's shaping who you are becoming at a neurological level. And this is where most people underestimate the cost. They think the damage is in the missed opportunity, the lost time, the visible outcome. But the real cost is internal. It's the wiring of your brain, the strengthening of avoidance, the normalization of inaction. Because once that becomes your default, it doesn't just affect one area of your life, it spreads. It shows up in your work, your health, your relationships, your decisions, your confidence. Everything becomes filtered through that pattern of avoidance. And suddenly, you're not just procrastinating on tasks, you're procrastinating on your life, delaying decisions, avoiding risks, staying in situations that no longer serve you, all because your system has been trained to prioritize comfort over growth. And here's the part that should make you pause. Because it means that if nothing changes, if you keep reinforcing the same patterns, your future is not uncertain, it's predictable. It will look exactly like your present, just more defined, more permanent, more difficult to escape. And that's the new reality, not some dramatic failure, not some sudden collapse, but a slow solidification of who you are right now, a version of yourself that had potential but never fully acted on it, that knew what to do but didn't execute consistently, that waited, delayed, hesitated until those behaviors became identity, and identity became destiny. And once it reaches that point, change doesn't just require effort, it requires breaking something that feels like who you are. And that's why it becomes so hard, because you're no longer just changing actions, you're challenging your own self-image, and most people avoid that. They stay in the familiar discomfort of stagnation, rather than face the unfamiliar discomfort of transformation. And that's why they stay stuck. Not because they can't change, but because they don't understand what needs to change. They focus on surface behaviors instead of underlying patterns. They chase motivation instead of building systems. They blame circumstances instead of examining conditioning. And as long as that continues, the cycle repeats, endlessly, quietly, effectively. But now you see it. Now you understand that laziness is not a fixed trait. It's a trained loop, and loops can be broken, but only if you're willing to step into discomfort deliberately, consistently, without negotiation. Because every time you do, you're not just completing a task, you're rewriting your programming, you're shifting your baseline, you're becoming someone who acts despite resistance, and that's a completely different identity. One that doesn't wait, doesn't hesitate, doesn't rely on feelings to determine action. And once that identity starts to form, everything changes. Because now discipline is no longer something you force, it's something you default to. And the same way laziness once felt automatic, execution becomes automatic. progress becomes natural, and the cost you were once paying starts to reverse. But only if you accept this reality fully. Only if you stop seeing yourself as someone who lacks motivation and start seeing yourself as someone who has been reinforcing the wrong patterns. Because that shift alone changes how you approach every moment of resistance. It turns it from an obstacle into an opportunity, from something to avoid into something to use. A signal that this is where the change happens. This is where the new identity is built. And if you can hold that perspective, if you can act on it consistently, then what once controlled you becomes something you control. And that is the difference most people never reach. Not because it's impossible, but because they never realize that the real battle was never about laziness. It was about what they kept teaching themselves to repeat. And then there comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, where everything slows down, not outside, but inside you. The noise fades, the excuses lose their volume, the distractions stop feeling satisfying, and you're left alone with something you've been avoiding for a long time. Yourself. No filters, no justifications, no stories to soften the truth. Just you and the weight of what you know you've been doing. Or more precisely, what you haven't been doing. And it's uncomfortable, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, like a pressure sitting in your chest. Because deep down you've always known. You've always known when you were cutting corners, when you were choosing easy over necessary, when you were walking away from something that mattered, and you ignored it, again and again, until now, when it's quiet enough for that truth to finally be heard, and it doesn't shout, it doesn't attack, it just sits there, steady, undeniable, asking you a simple question: is this really who you are? And you don't answer right away, because you can't lie here, not anymore, not in this silence, because this isn't about what you tell other people, it's about what you feel when no one is watching, when there's no performance, no image to maintain, just raw awareness. And in that awareness, you start to see the pattern clearly, not as isolated moments, but as a chain, connected, consistent, stretching back further than you want to admit. You see how one small decision led to another, how hesitation became habit, how habit became identity. And for a moment, you feel it, the cost, not in numbers, not in missed opportunities, but in something deeper, something more personal. You feel the distance between who you are and who you could have been. And it's not abstract anymore. It's real, almost tangible, like standing in front of a version of yourself that you recognize but never became. Stronger, sharper, more disciplined. Someone who followed through, someone who didn't negotiate with weakness. And you realize that version didn't disappear. It was built, or not built, by choices, your choices, repeated daily, quietly, consistently. And now you're here, facing the result of those choices. And there's a sting to that realization, a sharp clarity that cuts through all the excuses you've held on to. Because in this moment, you can't blame time. You can't blame circumstances. You can't blame lack of motivation, because you see it for what it is. You see that it was always a decision. Small, simple, often uncomfortable, but always yours. And that truth, it's heavy, but it's also honest. And honesty has a strange power. It doesn't comfort you, it doesn't make things easier, but it grounds you. It brings you back to something real, something solid. And for the first time in a long time, you're not running from it. You're sitting with it, feeling it, letting it settle. And in that stillness, something begins to shift, not dramatically, not like a sudden burst of motivation, but subtly, like a quiet recalibration. Because once you truly see the cost, once you feel it without distraction, without denial, something inside you stops accepting it, stops normalizing it, stops pretending it's okay. And that's where the change begins. Not in action yet, not in some big decision, but in awareness. Deep, uncomfortable, undeniable awareness. The kind that lingers, the kind that follows you, the kind that doesn't let you go back to sleep as easily as before. And you notice it in the small moments. The next time you reach for your phone instead of your work, there's a pause, a hesitation. Not the old hesitation that leads to delay, but a new one that asks, again? And it hits differently, because now you see the pattern. Now you recognize what this moment represents. Not just a small choice, but a continuation of something bigger, something you're no longer willing to ignore. And it doesn't feel good. It feels uncomfortable, tense, like standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, because you're caught between two versions of yourself, the one you've been and the one you could become. And for a second, neither feels fully real. But you know you have to choose, not once, not in a grand gesture, but in these small, quiet moments that no one else sees. And that's the part most people miss. They wait for a big turning point, a dramatic shift, something that forces change. But real change, it's quieter than that. It happens here, in this stillness, in this awareness, in this moment where you decide whether to follow the same path or take a different step. And it's not easy. It doesn't feel powerful or inspiring. It feels raw, uncertain, sometimes even frustrating, because you realize how many times you've been here before and chosen the easier option. And that memory, it weighs on you. It makes you question whether this time will be different, whether you'll actually follow through or fall back into the same pattern. And that doubt, it's real. It's part of the process. But here's the difference now. You're not ignoring it. You're not covering it up with distractions or excuses. You're facing it directly. And that alone changes something. Because facing truth, even when it's uncomfortable, builds a different kind of strength. Not loud, not visible, but steady, grounded. And in that grounded state, you start to understand something deeper, something beyond motivation, beyond discipline as a concept. You understand responsibility, not as a burden, but as ownership. Ownership of your actions, your patterns, your outcomes. And with that ownership comes a quiet sense of control. Not over everything, not over circumstances or external events, but over the one thing that matters most, your response, your choice in this moment. And that's where the power is. Not in changing everything at once, not in becoming perfect overnight, but in reclaiming that choice, again and again, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's slow, even when it doesn't feel rewarding immediately, because now you know what's at stake, not just in terms of results, but in terms of who you are becoming. And that awareness, it stays with you. It lingers in the background of your mind, shaping how you see your actions, how you interpret your decisions, how you respond to resistance. And over time, if you hold on to it, if you keep returning to it, it begins to reshape you, not through force, not through intensity, but through consistency, through small, deliberate choices made in moments like this, quiet, unseen, but powerful, because they are aligned with truth, not comfort. And as you sit in that understanding, in that stillness, you realize something simple but profound. This isn't about punishing yourself for the past. It's about deciding what you're willing to accept moving forward. And for the first time, that decision feels real. Not because it's loud or emotional, but because it's honest. And honesty, that's where everything begins to change. So, now you're here, not at the beginning anymore, not lost in noise, not hiding behind excuses, but standing in a place where things are clear. Maybe not easy, but clear. And clarity, that's where responsibility begins. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand the cost, once you feel the weight of what your choices have been creating, you don't get to go back to ignorance. You don't get to pretend you don't know. And that's a powerful place to be if you use it correctly. Because the lesson is not complicated. It's not hidden behind some complex strategy or secret formula. It's simple, brutally simple. Your life is a direct reflection of what you repeatedly do when no one is watching. Not what you plan, not what you say, not what you intend, but what you execute, especially in the moments where it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or easy to avoid. That's where your future is being built. Quietly, consistently, whether you like it or not. And if you take anything from this, let it be this. You don't need to change everything at once. You don't need to become perfect overnight. You don't need some massive surge of motivation to suddenly transform your life. What you need is to stop negotiating with the small moments, the ones that seem insignificant but aren't, the ones where you choose between action and delay, effort and comfort, discipline and excuse. Because those moments are not small, they are everything. They are the building blocks of identity. And identity, that's what shapes your results. So instead of asking yourself how to become more motivated, ask yourself something more honest, more direct. What am I doing right now that is reinforcing the version of me I don't want to be? and then take responsibility for that answer, not with guilt, not with self-judgment, but with awareness and action. Because guilt keeps you stuck, awareness moves you forward, and action, that's what changes everything. And it doesn't have to be dramatic, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be real, consistent, repeated. Because consistency compounds, just like laziness did, but in the opposite direction. And over time, those small actions, those quiet decisions, start to build something different, something stronger, a version of you that doesn't wait for the perfect moment, that doesn't rely on feeling ready, that moves anyway, that executes anyway, that follows through even when it's uncomfortable. And that version, it's not far away, it's built step by step, moment by moment, starting with the next decision you make after this, not tomorrow, not later, but the very next one, because that's the only place change can actually happen, in real time, in real choices. And here's the question you need to sit with, not just hear, but really sit with. If nothing changes, if you keep making the same choices you've been making, where will you be 6 months from now? Not where you hope to be, not where you imagine yourself, but realistically, based on your current patterns. Where does that path lead? And more importantly, are you willing to accept that outcome? Are you willing to live with that version of your life? Because if the answer is no, then the responsibility is yours to change the direction. No one is coming to do it for you. No sudden wave of motivation is going to carry you there. It's built in these moments, the quiet ones, the ones no one else sees, the ones where you either follow the same pattern or break it. And every time you break it, no matter how small it seems, you're sending a signal, you're rewriting something deeper. You're proving to yourself that you are not controlled by habit, that you can act with intention, that you can choose growth over comfort. And that proof, it builds confidence, real confidence, not the kind you talk about, but the kind you feel, the kind that comes from evidence, from doing what you said you would do, again and again, until it becomes who you are. And that's the long game, that's the real shift. Not a temporary burst of effort, but a permanent change in identity. And it starts with a decision, a quiet one, a simple one, but a powerful one. To stop paying the cost of laziness and start investing in discipline, knowing that both have a price, but only one gives you something back. And if this message resonates with you, if you feel that tension, that awareness, that recognition of where you are and where you could be, then don't let it fade like every other moment of clarity. Don't let it become another thing you heard and then ignored. Use it, act on it, even in the smallest way. And if you want to keep building that awareness, if you want reminders like this that challenge you, push you, keep you grounded in truth instead of comfort, then stay connected, not as a passive listener, but as someone who is actively choosing to grow. Because this isn't about consuming motivation, it's about applying it, living it. And if you're ready for that, then walk this path with me, step by step, decision by decision, and let's see what happens when you finally stop making excuses and start making progress.